The alarm's piercing wail cut through the bridge of the Soul's Promise like a blade through silk. Captain Lee Dae-ho's weathered hands flew across his command console, years of military training overriding the moment of startled confusion that flickered across his features. "Report." His voice carried the authority of someone who had commanded ships through 3 different conflicts, yet there was something different about this moment. The Chronos sector wasn't supposed to have any activity. It was dead space, a graveyard of failed mining operations and abandoned outposts. "Emergency beacon, sir," called Na Yuri from her communication station, her fingers dancing across holographic displays that painted her face in blues and greens. Standard galactic distress frequency, but she paused, her expression troubled. "The signal pattern is unusual. I've never seen anything quite like it." Dr. Park Soo-jin looked up from her xenobiology station, dark eyes sharp with curiosity. "Unusual how?" "It's incredibly complex. Most distress beacons are simple repeat patterns: location, ship classification, nature of emergency. This one has layers, almost like it's trying to communicate something beyond just, 'Help us.'" Dae-ho moved to the main viewing screen, his reflection ghosting across the starfield display. At 42, he carried himself with the easy confidence of a career diplomat, but his military background showed in the way his eyes constantly scanned for threats. "Distance and bearing?" 12,000 kilometers, bearing 27 Mark IV. "Sir, we're picking up weapons fire, multiple ships." The bridge fell silent except for the soft hum of life support systems. Every member of the crew knew what finding weapons fire in the Chronos sector meant. Pirates. The abandoned region had become a haven for raiders who preyed on the occasional foolish merchant or desperate refugee ship that wandered too far from the established shipping lanes. "Visual confirmation incoming," announced Lieutenant Cho Min-ho from the sensor station. The main screen flickered, then resolved into an image that made every person on the bridge catch their breath. A massive ship hung in space like a metallic predator, its hull scarred and pitted from countless battles. Even damaged, it was beautiful. In the way that apex predators were beautiful, all deadly curves and obvious weapons ports. But what made the crew's blood run cold wasn't the ship's size or obvious firepower. It was the distinctive bone-white hull plating and the curved, almost organic lines that every human in the galaxy had learned to fear. "Vexani," whispered Yuri, her voice barely audible. Dae-ho felt his stomach drop. The Vexani were legend and nightmare. For 3 centuries they had been the galaxy's boogeyman, the species that turned thriving worlds into ash and memory. Their very name was synonymous with unstoppable conquest and merciless warfare. Children across human space grew up with stories of Vexani raids that left nothing but empty cities and scattered bones. "Sir?" Minho's voice cracked slightly. The attacking ships appeared to be Tyrellian pirates. 4 vessels, standard raider configuration. They're attacking the Vexani ship. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Pirates attacking the most feared military force in the galaxy was like watching insects attack a dragon. Except this dragon appeared to be wounded, badly. The great ship's engines flickered irregularly, and entire sections of its hull showed signs of catastrophic damage. "They're not fighting back," Soo-jin observed, her scientific mind overriding her fear. "Look at their weapon systems. They're powered down. Either they can't fight, or they won't." Dae-ho finished quietly. He stared at the screen, his diplomatic training warring with a lifetime of conditioning that screamed run at the sight of a Vexani vessel. "Captain?" Yuri said urgently. "I'm intercepting communications from the pirate ships. They're coordinating for a final assault. Whatever's wrong with that Vexani ship, they mean to finish it off." The bridge crew turned to look at their captain, and Dae-ho could read the question in their eyes. What did you do when you stumbled across the most feared species in the galaxy being murdered by common pirates? The safe answer, the sane answer, was to turn around and pretend they'd never seen anything. But as Dae-ho watched the pirate ships maneuvering for their killing blow, something nagged at him. The distress beacon was still broadcasting, its complex patterns now seeming less like alien gibberish and more like, what? A plea? A warning? "Soo-jin," he said suddenly. "You said the beacon pattern was unusual. Could you run it through the Xenolinguistics database? See if there's any recognizable structure? The xenobiologist's fingers flew over her console. I'll need a few minutes to process the pattern, but Captain, why would we? Because something's not right here. Deho interrupted. Pirates don't attack Vexani ships, it's suicide. Either these pirates are completely insane or that ship is more helpless than it appears. Sir, Minho called out, his voice tight with tension. The pirates are powering weapons for what looks like a coordinated strike. Estimate 30 seconds until they open fire. Deho closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of command settle on his shoulders like a familiar burden. Every regulation, every piece of training, every survival instinct he possessed screamed at him to leave. The Vexani were the enemy of all life in the galaxy. They were death incarnate, the stuff of nightmares. But they were also broadcasting a distress signal. Captain? Yuri's voice was small, uncertain. Deho opened his eyes and straightened his shoulders. All hands battle stations. Tactical. Warm up our defensive grid and prepare to engage multiple hostiles. The bridge erupted in controlled chaos as his crew rushed to comply. But he could see the fear in their faces, the questions they were too disciplined to voice. He was about to order his small diplomatic vessel into combat to save the most feared species in the galaxy. Sir, Minho reported, his voice steadier now that they had a course of action. Weapons are online, shields at maximum. Yuri, open, a channel to the pirate vessels. Standard diplomatic frequency. Channel open, sir. Deho's voice carried across space with the authority of the Terran Diplomatic Corps behind it. Attention unidentified vessels, this is Captain Lee Deho of the Terran ship Soul's Promise. You are engaged in unlawful combat in neutral space. Stand down immediately and withdraw, or face the consequences. The response came back almost immediately, transmitted on an unsecured frequency that crackled with static and contempt. Terran ship withdraw immediately. This is salvage operation in unclaimed space. Don't interfere with business that doesn't concern you. Captain? Sujin called out suddenly, excitement overriding her fear. I've got something on that distress. Beacon. The pattern. It's not random. There are mathematical progressions, harmonic frequencies that suggest, Captain, I think it's trying to communicate something specific, not just distress, but gratitude and warning. It's warning us about something. Deho felt pieces of a puzzle clicking together in his mind. A Vexani ship, supposedly the most dangerous military force in the galaxy, broadcasting complex, mathematical patterns that included warnings and gratitude. Pirates bold enough to attack what should be certain death. They're not raiders, he said suddenly, understanding flooding through him. They're slavers. And that Vexani ship isn't a warship, it's a refugee transport. The revelation hit the bridge like a physical blow. Everything they thought they knew about the situation was wrong. All weapons. Target the pirate vessels. Fire at will. The Soul's Promise might have been a diplomatic vessel, but it was still a ship of the Terran Space Navy. Its weapons lit up space with coherent energy beams that lanced out toward the pirate ships, which had been so focused on their wounded prey that they'd completely ignored the threat of the newcomer. One pirate ship exploded immediately, its hull rupturing as the diplomatic vessel's surprisingly powerful weapons found their mark. The other 3 ships scattered, suddenly faced with an enemy they hadn't expected and couldn't ignore. Damage report on the Vexani vessel, Deho ordered, as his ship engaged the remaining pirates. Massive hull breaches, life support failing in multiple sections, engines operating at less than 15%, Minho reported. Captain, whatever they are, they're dying. As the last pirate ship fled into hyperspace, Deho found himself staring at the wounded Vexani vessel, its distress beacon still broadcasting its complex message of warning and gratitude. He had just saved the most feared species in the galaxy, and he had absolutely no idea what to do next. The silence on the bridge was deafening as both ships drifted in space. 2 species that had never met face to face, each wondering what the other would do now that the immediate crisis had passed. The silence stretched between the 2 ships like a taut wire, each moment heavy with uncertainty and possibility. Captain Lee Deho stood on his bridge, watching the massive Vexani vessel through the main viewer, acutely aware that he had just crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Behind him, his crew worked with nervous efficiency, maintaining their posts while stealing glances at the alien ship that dominated their visual field. "Sir?" Yuri's voice was carefully controlled, professional despite the tremor at its edges. "We're receiving a new transmission from the Vexani vessel. Different frequency, much more complex than the distress beacon." Dr. Park Soo-jin looked up from her console where scrolling data painted her face in soft blue light. "The mathematical patterns are even more sophisticated now. There's definitely intentional structure here, Captain. This isn't random alien chatter. They're trying to communicate something specific." Daeho moved closer to Yuri's station, studying the wave patterns dancing across her displays. "Can you decode any of it?" "I'm trying to run it through our xenolinguistic protocols, but sir..." Yuri hesitated, then continued with the honesty that had made her invaluable as a communications officer. "We don't have any Vexani language data in our databases. No one does. In 3 centuries of conflict, no one has ever successfully established communication with them." "Because no one has ever tried," Soo-jin murmured, her scientific curiosity overriding centuries of ingrained fear. "Every encounter has been military in nature. Kill or be killed. There's never been an opportunity for actual dialogue." Lieutenant Cho Min-ho cleared his throat nervously. "Captain, we're detecting movement aboard their vessel. Large biosignatures. Moving through the corridors. Should we raise shields?" Daeho considered the question. Standard protocol demanded maximum defensive posture when facing an unknown alien threat, especially one with the Vexani's reputation. But something about the situation felt different. The complexity of their communications, the mathematical precision of their distress beacon, the fact that they hadn't fired on the Soul's promise despite having clear opportunity. It all suggested intelligence and restraint, rather than mindless aggression. "Maintain current defensive status," he decided, "but keep monitoring. Yuri, can you establish a basic communication protocol? Mathematical progressions? Maybe prime numbers?" Yuri's fingers moved across her console with practiced ease. "Transmitting. A sequence of prime numbers now, sir. If they're as intelligent as their communication patterns suggest, they should recognize the mathematical significance." The response came almost immediately. The main viewer flickered, and suddenly they were looking at patterns of light that pulsed in clear mathematical sequences, not just prime numbers, but Fibonacci sequences, geometric progressions, and finally, impossibly, what looked like basic algebraic equations. "They're not just responding," Soo-jin breathed, her voice filled with wonder. "They're teaching. Look at this progression. They're showing us their mathematical notation, building from basic concepts to more complex ones." For the next 2 hours, the 2 ships engaged in the galaxy's most unlikely classroom session. The Vexani transmitted increasingly complex mathematical concepts while Yuri and Soo-jin worked frantically to decode and respond. Gradually, incredibly, basic communication began to emerge. "Captain," Yuri said suddenly, her voice tight with excitement, "I think they're trying to tell us something about their ship. These symbols here, they keep repeating in association with what looks like distress indicators." The answer came in the form of a visual transmission that made everyone on the bridge step back in shock. The screen showed the interior of the HFY Vexani vessel, and for the first time in human history they were looking at living Vexani. They were magnificent and terrifying in equal measure. 7 feet tall, with reptilian features that spoke of ancient predator lineages. Their scaled hide bore the scars of countless battles, but it was their eyes that held Daeho's attention. Amber orbs that glowed with unmistakable intelligence and, surprisingly, what looked almost like curiosity. The largest of the Vexani, his hide darker and more scarred than the others, moved closer to what was obviously their communication device. When he began to speak, his voice was a deep rumble that seemed to resonate through the ship's hull even across the vacuum of space. "The translation algorithms are starting to piece together some basic concepts," Soo-jin reported, her voice hushed with awe. I think he's introducing himself. And Captain, those gestures he's making, they're not aggressive displays, they're formal, ritualistic. I think he's trying to be polite. The alien continued speaking, and gradually Yuri's translation programs began producing recognizable concepts. Words like gratitude, honor, and debt appeared on her screens, mixed with terms that had no human equivalent but seemed to relate to concepts of obligation and respect. He's thanking us, Deho realized. He's formally thanking us for our assistance. More than that, Sujin added, studying the bio readings from the alien ship. Captain, look at these life signs. There are hundreds of Vexani aboard that ship, but a significant percentage of the readings suggest juveniles, children. This isn't a military vessel at all. It's a colony ship. The implications hit the bridge crew like a physical blow. Everything they thought they knew about the Vexani was being turned upside down. These weren't mindless conquerors. They were refugees, families fleeing some unknown disaster with their children in tow. The large Vexani, who Yuri's translation programs had identified as someone named Waktar, began a new sequence of communications. This time, he gestured to damaged sections of his ship, then to the Soul's Promise, then performed what could only be described as a questioning gesture. I think he's asking if we can help with repairs, Yuri said, her voice barely above a whisper. Sir, Minho interjected. With respect, we don't know anything about Vexani technology. We could do more harm than good. But Sujin was already shaking her head. Actually, we might be able to help. I've been analyzing their ship's energy signatures, and while their technology is more advanced than ours in some ways, the basic principles are similar. Their life support systems are failing, but they're based on atmospheric processors that aren't too different from our own. Deho found himself facing another impossible decision. Helping with repairs would mean sending crew members aboard a Vexani vessel, something that had never been attempted in the history of human-Vexani relations. It was dangerous, potentially catastrophic, and completely outside every protocol he'd ever been taught. It was also the right thing to do. Sujin, prepare an away team. Engineering specialists only, full environmental suits. Yuri, try to communicate our intentions to Waktar. Let him know we want to help. The translation took several minutes, involving complex mathematical models and increasingly sophisticated pictograms. When understanding finally dawned, Waktar's reaction was unlike anything they had expected. The great warrior's amber eyes widened, and he performed a series of gestures that spoke of profound respect and amazement. Captain, Yuri said softly, I think we just shocked him. The concept of offering aid to a potential enemy appears to be foreign to his worldview. An hour later, Dr. Park Sujin found herself aboard a Vexani vessel, surrounded by beings that her species had feared for centuries. But as she worked alongside Vexani engineers to repair their life support systems, she discovered something remarkable. Despite their fearsome appearance, the Vexani were careful, methodical, and intensely protective of their young. When a Vexani child, no more than 4 feet tall but already bearing the distinctive reptilian features of his species, approached curiously, his parents didn't drive him away. Instead, they carefully supervised the interaction, allowing their child to satisfy his curiosity about the strange mammalian visitor. Captain, Sujin's voice crackled through the comm system. You need to see this. The Vexani aren't what we thought they were. They're not monsters. They're just people trying to survive in a hostile galaxy. Back aboard the Soul's Promise, Deho watched through the visual link as his crew worked alongside former enemies, building the first bridge of understanding between two species that had never imagined they could coexist. Waktar approached the communication device again, and this time his message was clear even without translation. He placed his massive clawed hand over his heart, then extended it toward the camera, a gesture that needed no words to understand. It was gratitude, respect, and the beginning of something unprecedented in galactic history. As the repairs continued and communication became easier, one fact became increasingly clear. The galaxy was about to change forever. Humans had just made friends with their greatest enemy, and neither species would ever be the same. 3 days had passed since the initial contact, and the Soul's Promise maintained its position alongside the massive Vexani vessel, now identified as the Tekmor's Honor. The name itself had been a revelation. It wasn't a designation of war or conquest, but rather honored an elder who had apparently sacrificed himself to save their people. Captain Lee Dae-ho stood in his ready room, reviewing the translated logs that Dr. Park Soo-jin had painstakingly decoded from the Vexani ship's database. What he was reading challenged everything he thought he knew about galactic history. The door chimed and Soo-jin entered, her face bearing the exhaustion of someone who had been working non-stop for 72 hours. Behind her came Nayuri, carrying a datapad that glowed with newly translated text. "Captain," Soo-jin began, her voice heavy with implications, "you need to hear this. Everything we've been told about the Vexani. It's not just wrong, it's backwards." Dae-ho gestured for them to sit, noting the barely contained excitement in Yuri's eyes despite her fatigue. "Show me." Yuri activated her datapad, and holographic displays filled the room with images from the Vexani historical records. The first image showed a world of impossible beauty, crystalline cities that seemed to grow from living stone, vast gardens that spiraled up mountainsides, and creatures that moved with the grace of natural evolution rather than engineered purpose. "This is Vexen Prime," Soo-jin explained. "Or rather, this was their homeworld. According to their records, it was destroyed approximately 347 years ago." "Destroyed how?" Dae-ho asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "Stellar collapse," Yuri replied, manipulating the hologram to show astronomical data. "Their sun went supernova with almost no warning. The Vexani had less than 6 months to evacuate their entire civilization." The next series of images showed the evacuation. Massive ships loading millions of refugees, the desperate rush to preserve their culture, their art, their children. But what struck Dae-ho most was what came after. The wandering years, the desperate search for new homes, and the inevitable conflicts with species that saw their arrival as invasion rather than immigration. "Captain," Soo-jin leaned forward, her scientific mind struggling with the ethical implications of her discoveries. "Every conquest we attributed to them, every world they supposedly destroyed, they were trying to negotiate for settlement rights. But their appearance, their size, their natural weapons, other species attacked first and asked questions later. So they adapted," Dae-ho said quietly, beginning to understand the tragic cycle that had created the galaxy's most feared species. "They had to," Yuri confirmed. "When diplomacy failed, when species after species met them with weapons instead of words, they became what they needed to become to survive. Warriors. But Captain, they never stopped being refugees." A soft chime indicated an incoming communication from the Vexani ship. The main screen in Dae-ho's ready room activated, showing the familiar figure of Waktar, but this time he was not alone. Beside him stood an elderly Vexani whose scales had faded to a pale silver white, and whose amber eyes held depths of wisdom and sorrow that spoke of centuries of life. "Captain Dae-ho," Waktar's voice came through the translation system, now much more sophisticated after days of linguistic exchange. "I present Tekmor, eldest of our survivors and keeper of our histories." The ancient Vexani moved forward, with a dignity that commanded respect. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of ages and his words fell like stones into still water. "Young mammal friend," Tekmor began, using the formal address that the Vexani had developed for humans, "I have lived through the death of our world, the long wandering, and the transformation of my people from builders to warriors. I have seen us become the very monsters that other species feared us to be, not from choice but from necessity." Soo-jin activated her recording equipment, understanding that she was witnessing a moment of profound historical significance. "Tell me about the wandering," Dae-ho said simply. What followed was 3 hours of the most tragic tale ever recorded in galactic history. Tekmor spoke of the early years after the evacuation, when Vexani ships approached other species with gifts and offers of trade, hoping to find worlds where they could settle peacefully. He told of the first massacre, when the Calarian Empire destroyed an entire Vexani settlement ship, killing 30,000 refugees because they feared the newcomer's appearance. We learned, Tekmor said, his ancient voice heavy with regret, that in this galaxy, strength is the only language that all species understand. We could not afford to appear weak, for weakness meant death for our children. He showed them images of the early conflicts, Vexani ships forced to fight back against species that attacked them on sight. Each victory was a Pyrrhic one, adding to their reputation as conquerors while driving them further from their goal of finding peaceful homes. But you did conquer worlds, Yuri said carefully, trying to understand the contradictions in the historical record. We took what we needed to survive, Wakhtar interjected, his tone defensive but not aggressive. Worlds that could support our biology, resources that could feed our people, but we never destroyed the native populations. We relocated them to regions we could not use, often improving their living conditions in the process. Tekmor nodded sadly. But history is written by those who survive to tell it, and we never learned to tell our story in ways that other species could understand. Each act of self-defense became a tale of unprovoked aggression. Each desperate settlement became a story of conquest. Dr. Sujin made a startling connection. The mineral compositions of the worlds attributed to Vexani conquest. They all share specific geological characteristics. You weren't randomly attacking. You were looking for worlds that could support your specific biology. Your species requires unusual mineral balances in your environment, Deho realized. Without them, you sicken and die. Our children especially, Wakhtar confirmed. A Vexani child raised on a world without the proper mineral content will not survive to adulthood. We were not conquering, we were trying to save our young. The implications were staggering. For 3 centuries, the galaxy had lived in fear of a species that was simply trying to find homes for their children. The Vexani had become the monsters they were expected to be, not from evil intent, but from desperate necessity. How many of you are left? Deho asked quietly. Tekmor's expression grew even more sorrowful. Once we numbered in the billions. Now across all our ships, perhaps 50 million survive. And each year, more die as we fail to find suitable worlds for settlement. The room fell silent as the weight of near extinction settled over them. These weren't the unstoppable conquerors of legend. They were a dying people, clinging to survival against impossible odds. There's something else, Sujin said suddenly, her mind racing through the biological data she had gathered. Your warrior castes, your emphasis on combat. It's not just cultural adaptation. You've been genetically selecting for survival traits. Over 3 centuries, you've literally evolved into a more militaristic species to survive in a hostile galaxy. Wakhtar nodded grimly. We are not the same people who fled Vexen Prime. That species died with our world. We are what remained, shaped by centuries of conflict into something our ancestors would barely recognize. But the core of who you are is still there, Deho observed, thinking of the careful way the Vexani protected their children, the formal courtesy of their communications, the mathematical beauty of their art. You're still the same people, just wearing armor made of necessity. As if summoned by his words, a young Vexani entered the communication chamber. She was barely 5 feet tall, her scales still bearing the bright colors of youth, and when she saw the humans on the screen, her amber eyes widened with curiosity, rather than fear. Grandfather Tekmor, she said in the musical tones of childhood, are these the soft ones who helped fix our airmakers? The ancient Vexani's expression softened as he placed a protective hand on the child's shoulder. Yes, little spark. These are our new friends. The child studied the humans with intense curiosity, then performed a perfect formal greeting, her small claws clicking together in the ritual pattern that adult Vexani used for first meetings. She has never seen war, Tekmor explained quietly. She knows only the stories we tell her of the world we lost. In her, we see what we might have been, what we might yet become again. Deho felt something shift in his understanding, a fundamental realization that would change everything. The Vexani weren't the enemy. They were refugees who had been forced to become warriors, but who still carried within them the seeds of the peaceful civilization they had once been. What do you need? he asked simply. The question hung in the air between the two species, heavy with possibility and hope. For the first time in 3 centuries, someone had asked the Vexani not what they wanted to take, but what they needed to survive. And in that moment, Captain Lee Daeho understood that he was not just making first contact with an alien species. He was witnessing the potential rebirth of a civilization that had been lost to the darkness between the stars. The emergency klaxon aboard the Soul's Promise shattered the peaceful routine that had developed over the past week. Captain Lee Daeho bolted upright from his desk where he had been reviewing terraforming proposals, his coffee mug clattering to the floor as he rushed to the bridge. "Report," he called out as the turbolift doors hissed open. Lieutenant Cho Min-ho turned from his sensor station, his face pale with concern. "Captain, we've got incoming ships. Multiple contacts bearing 09 Mark 7. It's a Terran Navy. Battle group, sir. 12 vessels including the dreadnought Incheon's Fury." Daeho's stomach dropped. He recognized that ship's name. It was the flagship of Commander Kim Tae-woo, his former academy roommate and current hardliner who believed that the only good alien was a dead alien. If Tae-woo was here, it meant someone had reported the Soul's Promise's position and activities to Fleet Command. Time to intercept? 18 minutes at current approach speed, Min-ho replied. "Sir, they're broadcasting on military frequencies, demanding immediate response from all vessels in the area." Nayuri looked up from her communication station, worry evident in her dark eyes. "Captain, I'm receiving multiple transmissions from the Vexani ship. Wakhtar is asking if these are reinforcements or threats." The irony wasn't lost on Daeho. A week ago, the arrival of a Terran battle group would have been a relief in the presence of Vexani ships. Now he found himself more concerned about his own species' potential for violence than that of the supposed galactic boogeyman floating peacefully alongside his vessel. "Open a channel to the Thekmor's honor," he ordered, "and patch me through to the battle group on military frequency." Within moments, his ready room screen split to show both Wakhtar's concerned reptilian features and the stern human face of Commander Kim Tae-woo. The contrast was jarring. The supposed monster looked worried but controlled, while the human commander radiated barely contained aggression. "Daeho," Tae-woo's voice carried the authority of superior rank and old friendship pushed to its limits. "What in the name of Terra's ghost are you doing out here? Our long-range sensors detected weapons fire and Vexani energy signatures. Are you under duress?" Before Daeho could respond, Tae-woo's eyes focused on the other half of the screen, and his expression shifted from concern to horror. "Sweet ancestors, is that a live Vexani? Daeho, step away from the communication device. We're coming to extract you immediately." "Tae-woo, wait," Daeho began, but his old friend had already cut the transmission. Wakhtar's amber eyes showed a flash of what Daeho had learned to recognize as Vexani humor. "Your friend seems energetic in his protective instincts. Should we prepare for combat?" "No," Daeho said firmly. "There will be no fighting. I won't let this situation escalate into violence." But even as he spoke, he could see the tactical display showing Vexani ships moving into defensive positions around the Thekmor's honor. 3 more vessels had arrived during the week. Not warships, but converted cargo haulers and civilian transports carrying more refugees. The sight of a Terran battle group approaching had triggered every survival instinct the Vexani possessed. "Captain," Dr. Park Soo-jin entered his ready room at a run, her scientific equipment still in hand. "I was in the middle of a cultural exchange session with the Vexani children when their parents suddenly became very protective. What's happening?" "We're about to find out if a week of breakthrough diplomacy can prevent 3 centuries of ingrained hatred from starting a war," Daeho replied grimly. The next few minutes were a dance of positioning and communication that could have gone disastrously wrong. The Terran battle group approached in standard attack formation, while the Vexani ships arranged themselves to protect their civilian vessels. To an outside observer, it would have looked like the prelude to a massacre. "Incoming transmission. From Commander Kim," Yuri announced. "He's demanding that we move away from the Vexani ships immediately." "Tell him I'm coming aboard the Incheon's Fury to brief him in person," Daeho decided. "And Yuri, prepare a complete data package of everything we've learned about the Vexani. Everything, their history, their refugee status, the children aboard their ships, all of it. An hour later, Daeho found himself in the briefing room of his old friend's flagship, facing a circle of senior naval officers whose expressions ranged from skeptical to openly hostile. Commander Kim Tae-woo sat at the head of the table, his weathered face showing the strain of command and the weight of difficult decisions. "Let me understand this correctly," said Captain Song Hyejin, the battle group's intelligence officer. "You're claiming that the most feared military force in the galaxy is actually a collection of refugees looking for homes for their children." "I'm not claiming anything," Daeho replied calmly. "I'm presenting you with documented evidence, translated historical records, and biological data that proves it beyond question." He activated the holographic display, showing the same images that had convinced him. The destruction of Vexen Prime, the desperate evacuation, the centuries of failed diplomatic attempts. But he could see in their faces that 3 centuries of conditioning couldn't be overcome by data alone. "Even if this is true," said Commander Park Ji-hoon, the tactical officer, "they're still dangerous. Look at their ship designs, their weapons, capabilities. They could annihilate any of our colonies if they chose to." "They could," Daeho agreed. "But they haven't. In a week of close contact, they've shown nothing but courtesy, gratitude, and a desperate desire for peaceful coexistence." Tae-woo leaned forward, his expression troubled. "Daeho, I've known you since the academy. You're not naive, and you're not easily fooled. But what you're suggesting, alliance with the Vexani, it goes against everything we've been taught, everything our military doctrine is based on." "Then maybe it's time to question that doctrine," Daeho replied. "Tae-woo, what if we've been wrong? What if 3 centuries of conflict could have been avoided if someone had just asked the right questions?" The debate continued for hours, with Daeho presenting evidence and his fellow officers raising concerns about security, public reaction, and the implications of such a radical shift in policy. But gradually, as the weight of evidence accumulated, something began to change in the room. The turning point came when Dr. Soo-jin, who had been permitted to join the briefing, presented her biological findings about Vexani children and their mineral requirements. "Commanders," she said, her voice carrying the authority of scientific truth, "we have the technology to help them. Our terraforming capabilities, combined with their geological expertise, could create suitable worlds for both species. We're talking about saving an entire civilization from extinction." "And what do we get in return?" asked Captain Song, though her tone had shifted from hostility to curiosity. "Knowledge that we can't imagine," Soo-jin replied. "Their technology, their engineering capabilities, their 3 centuries of space-based survival techniques. But more than that, we get to be the species that chose cooperation over conflict, understanding over fear." Commander Kim was quiet for a long moment, studying the data displays that showed Vexani families, their children, their desperate hope for a future that didn't involve constant warfare. Finally, he spoke. "If we do this, and I'm not saying we will, but if we do this, it changes everything. The entire balance of power in the galaxy shifts. Other species will have to reconsider their assumptions about both humans and Vexani." "Yes," Daeho said simply. "It does." Another long silence, then Tae-woo made his decision. "I want to meet with this Waktar personally, face to face. If we're going to stake our careers and possibly our lives on this alliance, I need to look into his eyes and see what kind of being we're dealing with." 2 hours later, in an unprecedented moment in galactic history, the commanding officers of a Terran battle group sat across a conference table from Vexani warriors in the Soul's Promise's main briefing room. The size difference was striking. The Vexani towered over the humans even while seated, but the atmosphere was one of careful respect rather than fear. Waktar spoke slowly, allowing the translation systems to keep pace. "Commander Kim, your friend Daeho has given my people something we had forgotten existed: hope. For 3 centuries we have known only conflict and survival. Your species offers something different. You offer choice. What choice is that?" Tae-woo asked, his military bearing softened by genuine curiosity. "The choice to be something other than what necessity has made us. Tekmor answered, the ancient Vexani having insisted on attending despite his advanced age. We became warriors because the galaxy left us no alternative. But with allies, with friends, perhaps we can remember how to be builders again. The meeting continued late into the ship's night cycle, with both species sharing their hopes, fears, and visions for a possible future. When it finally ended, Commander Kim Tae-woo made an announcement that would echo through galactic history. I'm recommending to Fleet Command that we establish formal diplomatic relations with the Vexani Coalition. Furthermore, I'm proposing a joint terraforming project to create suitable worlds for Vexani settlement. 6 months later, Captain Lee Dae-ho stood on the observation deck of the orbital station New Harmony, watching the impossible sight below him unfold. The planet's surface showed a patchwork of human agricultural domes and Vexani crystal gardens, their different technologies creating a mosaic of cooperation that would have been unimaginable a year ago. Final atmospheric readings are within acceptable parameters for both species, reported Dr. Park Soo-jin, who now held the title of Chief Xenobiological Advisor to the Terran Vexani Cooperative Council. The Vexani geological modifications have actually improved our soil composition by 30%. Beside her, Na Yuri, now Director of Interspecies Communications, nodded as she reviewed data flowing across her tablet. The linguistic exchange programs are exceeding all projections. We now have over 200 humans who can communicate fluently in Vexani, and nearly 500 Vexani who have mastered Terran Standard. Dae-ho smiled, remembering the early days when simple mathematical progressions had been their only means of communication. Now human children were learning Vexani engineering principles while Vexani youngsters studied human agricultural techniques. The integration had been swift and natural, driven by mutual curiosity rather than political necessity. Incoming. Transmission from the surface, Yuri announced. It's Wakhtar. He says the first harvest celebration is beginning, and we're expected to attend. The shuttle ride to the planet's surface gave Dae-ho time to reflect on how dramatically the galaxy had changed. News of the Human-Vexani alliance had spread like wildfire, forcing every major political power to reconsider their assumptions about both species. The Calarian Empire, once the Vexani's most implacable enemies, had formally requested mediation talks. The Orth Confederation had established trade agreements. Even the notoriously xenophobic Talmark Republic had begun tentative diplomatic overtures. The landing pad was a perfect example of the cooperation that had become commonplace on New Sanctuary. Human engineering had created the basic structure, but Vexani crystal growing techniques had transformed it into something that was both functional and beautiful, a platform that seemed to grow from the living rock of the planet itself. Wakhtar waited for them at the shuttle ramp, but he was almost unrecognizable from the desperate warrior they had first encountered. His battle scars remained, but his armor had been replaced with ceremonial robes that incorporated both Vexani crystalwork and human textile arts. Most striking of all, he was laughing, a deep rumbling sound of genuine joy that had taken months for the translation systems to properly interpret. Friend Captain Dae-ho, Wakhtar said, using the formal address that the Vexani had created specifically for humans who had earned their highest respect. You arrive at the perfect moment. The young ones have prepared something special for you. He led them through streets that showcased the best of both civilizations. Human architecture provided practical, efficient structures, while Vexani artisans had transformed them into works of art with their crystal-growing techniques. Gardens mixed earth plants with Vexani bioluminescent flora, creating displays of impossible beauty that glowed softly in the planet's twilight. But it was the people that truly demonstrated how much had changed. Human and Vexani children played together in the streets, their games incorporating elements from both cultures. Adult humans and Vexani worked side by side on construction projects, their different strengths complementing each other perfectly. Most remarkably of all, there was no tension, no fear, just the easy familiarity of neighbors and friends. The celebration was being held in the central plaza, a vast space that could accommodate the size differences between the two species. As they approached, Daiho could hear the distinctive harmony of human and Vexani voices raised together in song, another impossible development that had emerged from their cultural exchanges. Captain Daiho. The voice belonged to little Kexara, the young Vexani, who had become something of an unofficial ambassador between the children of both species. At 7 years old, she stood nearly as tall as an adult human, but her bright scales and enthusiastic manner made her age unmistakable. "We've been practicing," she announced proudly, then launched into a flawless rendition of Amazing Grace in perfect Terran standard, followed immediately by a traditional Vexani harmony that brought tears to the eyes of the older Vexani in the crowd. Elder Thekmor approached, moving with the dignity that age and wisdom brought, but also with a lightness of spirit that had been absent during their first meetings. "Captain, this child learns your songs faster than I learned your language. Perhaps the young adapt more easily to hope than the old." "Or perhaps," Daiho suggested, "hope is easier when you have friends to share it with." The celebration continued into the night, with speeches from both human and Vexani leaders, displays of joint technological achievements, and presentations of the artistic collaborations that had emerged from their cultural exchange. But the moment that would be remembered in history books came when Commander Kim Tae-woo, now serving as military liaison to the Cooperative Council, made an unexpected announcement. "Friends, humans, and Vexani alike," he began, his voice carrying across the plaza through the translation systems. "We have received word from the outer systems. The hegemony of Extal, a previously unknown aggressive species, has been attacking civilian colonies in the Epsilon sector. They have ignored all attempts at communication and shown no mercy to non-combatants." A murmur ran through the crowd, not of fear, but of determination. The galaxy's two most effective military forces working together represented a power that no aggressive species could ignore. "The Terran Navy and the Vexani fleet will respond to this threat together," Tae-woo continued. "But we go not as conquerors, not as an unstoppable war machine, but as protectors. We go to offer the Extal the same choice that we gave each other, friendship or isolation, cooperation or conflict." Wakhtar stepped forward, his massive frame casting shadows in the artificial lighting. "The Vexani have been warriors by necessity for 3 centuries. Today we choose to be warriors by choice. Warriors for peace, warriors for protection, warriors for the hope that conflict need not be eternal." The joint fleet that launched from New Sanctuary a week later was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Human ships with their sleek efficiency flew alongside Vexani vessels with their organic curves and crystal-based technology. The crews were integrated, with humans learning Vexani combat techniques while Vexani studied human tactical flexibility. But more importantly, the fleet carried something that neither species had possessed alone: credibility as peacemakers. When they encountered the Extal forces devastating a mining colony in the Rigel system, their response was measured and precise. They disabled the Extal ships without destroying them, rescued the colony's survivors, and then did something unprecedented. They waited. "This is Captain Lee Daiho of the Terran Vexani Cooperative Fleet," his message broadcast on all frequencies. "To the commanders of the Extal forces, we have stopped your attack on this colony not to conquest you, but to protect the innocent. We offer you the same choice that we offered each other: dialogue over destruction, understanding over conflict." The response, when it came, was filled with confusion and suspicion. The Extal, it turned out, were also refugees, beings fleeing a cosmic disaster that had consumed their home regions of space. But unlike the Vexani, they had chosen aggression as their first response to other species. "We have been where you are." Wakhtar's message followed Daiho's. "We have known the desperation of a dying people, the fear that drives species to take what they need rather than ask for what they deserve. But there is another way. Let us show you." 3 months of careful negotiation followed. The Extal were a crystalline species, silicon-based rather than carbon-based, and their environmental needs were different from both humans and Vexani. But the cooperative terraforming techniques that had created New Sanctuary proved adaptable, and soon the galaxy was witnessing the establishment of new crystal gardens. The first Extal settlement built through cooperation rather than conquest. Dr. Sujin's personal log, recorded a year after first contact with the Vexani, captured the transformation that had swept across known space. Today, I attended the graduation ceremony for the first class of the Interspecies Academy on New Harmony. 37 species were represented among the graduates, including humans, Vexani, Extal, and even a few Calarians who have overcome centuries of conditioning to embrace cooperation over conflict. The valedictorian was Kexara, the young Vexani who has become something of a symbol for our new age. Her speech was delivered in 5 different languages, but her message was universal. That differences in biology, culture, and history need not be barriers to friendship. As I watched human, Vexani, and Extal children playing together after the ceremony, I was struck by how natural it all seemed. These children will grow up in a galaxy where cooperation is the norm rather than the exception, where the phrase impossible alliance has lost all meaning.